You just said, hold on a second. Okay. Well, hello, Committee of 70 fans. Welcome to a special Election Day edition of Studio C70. I'm David Thornburg, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. And we're starting off today's program day with a conversation with Ari Mittleman. Ari, among other things, is host of a terrific Pennsylvania politics podcast called Kitchen Table Politics, and we're going to talk to him today about what he's learned about the Commonwealth and our current state of politics. So welcome, Ari.
Well, David, thank you. It's always great to reconnect with you and your team.
Yep. So let's start with sort of the origin story of the podcast, Kitchen Table Politics. You've done about 30 episodes so far. So if you had to do all of those in person, you would have probably put about 10,000 miles on your car, but thanks to the miracles of technology. But tell us a little bit about the origin story, and then I want to talk about your takeaways about this curious state and its state of politics. But where did this all begin?
Well, I guess the secret's out. We're not sitting around the kitchen table. I do have a lot of listeners who have actually thought that I've trekked up to Erie and elsewhere. Pennsylvania will always be home. I'm originally from the Lehigh Valley. For better or worse, I'm a Maryland voter for the last few years. But look, like any good thing, this happened completely by happenstance and was frankly a dare. It was right around now, a few days after the November 2020 election. And like a lot of folks, I was just having conversations about how the dust was settling and clearly a lot of split ticket voting. And one of the conversations got fairly in the weeds. And my friend said, this would be a great conversation for a podcast. And I said, I'm positive, Mike, that there's a Pennsylvania political podcast. And he said, I'm positive I would know if there was one. And one thing led to the other. I don't back down from a dare, and with the help of incredible students, I think we've crossed over 5,500 listeners, and I'm still surprised that we're the only Pennsylvania political podcast.
That's great, and we're all for transparency here at the Committee of 70. So in full transparency, you are a former staffer and colleague for Senator Casey, and have long roots in the Democratic Party. So a lot of your conversations do involve Democratic office holders and talking to Democratic politicians. And so I just wanted to point that out. We'll perhaps be in search of, I'm not aware of any Republican podcast of this ilk, but if such a person shows up, we'd be happy to talk to him.
I will make an advertisement. I have been quietly, as we've built this listener base, I have been quietly looking for a Republican co-host. So if anyone is watching today, would love to talk to you, because I do think that as we look at 2022, number one, bipartisanship is just so key, but inevitably as we get close to the races, it'll go off the rails. So I would really love to have candidates from both sides of the aisle. But yes, we have had primarily Democratic office holders, operatives, candidates, but then also nonpartisan observers, professors, pollsters, journalists, and others join.
Yep. Well, to your credit, you really, at least, again, thanks to the podcast technology, travel far and wide. Most folks that try to cover Pennsylvania, sort of hang out in Philadelphia, hang out in Pittsburgh, a cursory drive by the Capitol in Harrisburg, and maybe a diner in Lancaster, and they call it a day. But, I've listened to I think you did an interview with Kathy Dahlkemper all the way up in Erie. I listened to, I think, one from Westmoreland County out in the Southwest. Obviously, you covered the Lehigh Valley. Philadelphia, you did a terrific interview with one of the Inquirer reporters, I think, early on. So give us your takeaways. That the inevitable and perplexing question: what's going on out there in Pennsylvania politics?
Well, I suppose we'll learn a little bit more, hopefully within the next 24 hours, if not just the next 12 hours. But the risk of stating the obvious, Pennsylvania is a large and diverse state, and the census further prove that. When we take a look at the Puerto Rican community and broader Latino community in the state, it's growing. Registration numbers don't necessarily sync with that. The communities you referenced, Westmoreland County, I was actually just out there last week physically driving. You have entire communities in the Mon Valley and the greater Pittsburgh media market that are literally shrinking. Then you have communities in the Lehigh Valley and South Central Pennsylvania, Cumberland, Lancaster County, that at the detriment of family farms are just mushrooming, no pun intended, over the last decade. So a lot of diversity out there. That being said, I think there's more voters north of Girard Avenue in Philadelphia than probably 20, 22, 23 random Pennsylvania counties combined. So Philadelphia, for better or worse, is very much still the nucleus of Pennsylvania statewide politics.
So the old, we're looking at statewide elections. We'll talk in a second about local elections today, but we're looking at significant statewide elections next year for Senate and for governors. The traditional formula, if you are let's just say you're a Democrat, is you roll up the margins in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh/Allegheny County, and you try to hold down the vote in the famous T. Does that still hold, or have things gotten more complicated?
Well, I think everything related to policymaking, and you can't have policymaking without politics. I mean, it's kind of infinitely more complicated, largely in part to technology and social media, in my opinion. But that's a whole other discussion. Look, I think what we saw last year, and the Biden-Harris ticket won. Period. End of story. Hard stop. But I think what we saw last year is really how a winning campaign builds in Pennsylvania. You saw record turnout in Philadelphia. For the record, the Trump-Pence ticket got 18% of that turnout, but you had 749,000 voters show up. That's your base if you're a Democratic statewide candidate. But and then elsewhere you can go to the other communities that you referenced. But the key, I think, really is not to forget some of these smaller communities. And you saw incredible outreach by the Biden-Harris ticket in the midst of a pandemic in places like Washington County. A Democrat 20 years ago handily won Washington County. That's south of Pittsburgh. I don't know in the future if a Democrat's going to win Washington County, but there's a difference between finding 33% of the vote and finding 39% of the vote. And we could juxtapose Washington County with probably 20 other counties.
Sure.
And finding that additional 3, 4, 5, 6% of voters, in addition to tremendous GOTV, get out the vote efforts in the Democratic base. That's I think the winning formula.
Yeah. We'll know today if the city of Pittsburgh makes history with the mayoral contest out there, but obviously the marquee story in the primary was the progressive outsider of a sort, Ed Gainey, beating the incumbent Bill Peduto. And I'm remembering you had at least a couple of episodes talking to folks about that out there. Is that we try to generalize situations like that, but is that a dynamic that the Democratic Party ought to be concerned about? The kind of establishment figure, Peduto, well-known, well-established, being taken out by the progressive insurgent?
Well, a bit to unpackage there, and I would encourage viewers to visit papoliticspodcast.org. And we did spend, my recollection is 4 or 5 episodes in the lead up to the May primary, all with the lens of lessons learned from 2020. But there were a lot of benchmarks or mile markers that happened in the following the murder of George Floyd, and then leading up into the fall election that kind of set the stage for what you referenced. So look, it seems fairly certain that Pittsburgh's going to make history, and it's quite exciting. They're going to elect a black mayor. But I think a lot of folks were surprised. I think a year ago, if folks said that Mayor Peduto was at risk from a challenger from the left, I think folks would have been quite surprised. I mean, this is the week that world leaders are gathered discussing climate change. Mayor Peduto is, I'm not going to use the past tense, is an international leader rallying mayors to combat the climate crisis. Is an excellent relationship with many brothers and sisters in organized labor, but for a variety of reasons, some of which related to the murder of George Floyd and relations with the police force in Pittsburgh. He lost, and he lost pretty handily in that primary.
Yeah. I mentioned
You see this elsewhere, by the way. I mean, it's there have been other instances across the Commonwealth where challengers from the left have knocked off in primaries.
Yeah.
The Erie County executive race, that primary was also, I think, surprising to some folks.
Of course, a similar dynamic in the Republican Party, the energy coming from the right flank of the Republican Party. And we were talking earlier because today is sort of the local election day, even though, they're not the marquee city council and mayoral races in most instances. But, we're electing judges, we're electing county officials, controller, district attorney, and most vividly, school board members. And school board elections are generally what they call low information elections. So you sort of walk through the paces. You generally elect the same people you elected before. But this time, not just school board races, but local elections feel different. Is that what you're sensing out there?
Yeah, for better or worse. For the better, I suppose, if you're a campaign operative, but there is unprecedented record spending in school board races, and also, for that matter, races for township supervisor and commissioner and county executive, and these low turnout affairs, which I don't know why they're low turnout. I never understood that since I started voting when I was a senior in high school. I mean, these are the public servants who are directly on a daily basis affecting our lives, much more so than U.S. senators. But for whatever reason, I think it is going to be low turnout. But I'm sure that some viewers, if, for example, out in Radnor, Delaware County, unprecedented spending, I'm sure some viewers have received all sorts of calls and texts and items sent to their mailbox, knocks on their door. And that's in a solidly blue county, such a divisive school board race. And then you make your way out to York County, for example, the Central York School Board. This race has literally attracted national and international news media attention.
I think we know the answer to this question, but what are the issues that have energized those races?
I mean, in theory, every race is slightly different, and it's a snapshot of the local community. But former Speaker Tip O'Neill, his maxim maybe is dying a slow death, that all politics are local. So, long way of answering your question. There's a lot of strong thoughts about curriculum and this concept of critical race theory. There's a lot of thoughts about masking. We saw this several years ago, and it's reemerged about bathrooms and locker rooms.
You said
I would love, I mean, what do I know? But I would love school districts across the Commonwealth to be talking about electric vehicle fleets, reducing their energy costs, all sorts of items that I think would be for the better of the community and the better of the Commonwealth and our country. But that doesn't seem to be the topic du jour.
Yeah. As you mentioned him earlier, has Tip O'Neill's law been repealed? Do you think this is the new normal? Maybe a little early to tell, but are all local elections going to have that sort of national overtone and bring in the national dollars as these have?
I don't know. Time will tell whether all politics remains local or it just becomes so national and so polarized. I would point up to Northampton County, adjacent to where I grew up in Lehigh County. The Northampton County structure is that there's a full-time executive and a council, somewhat different than what many counties have, which is 3 commissioners. The incumbent county executive is running against an individual who quite proudly and quite loudly was down here in Washington on January 6th. And I'm not weighing in on the race. It's just a county executive. Yes, a small part of a county executive's role is to administer an election, a free and fair election, but there's significant other issues that a county executive works on. And it's concerning to me, to say the least. I think it should be concerning to many people that there are individuals running for county office across the Commonwealth today that are running very much focused on how elections are administered.
Yeah, that should be a non-starter. That should be a given. That should be something that just hums quietly in the background. But you probably have seen the troubling number that something like a third of all election directors around the Commonwealth resigned or left office in the last year or so. There also means there's a fair number of folks that are just sort of learning the ropes under a great deal of political pressure and scrutiny that they probably weren't expecting on the way in.
Yeah, I think chief among them, and he's just a tremendous public servant. And I think all Philadelphians, regardless of party, should be grateful for Al Schmidt. And it's just unfortunate is an understatement, but it's incredibly unfortunate what him and his family have had to endure coming up on 365 days.
Yep. If any of you saw his testimony in front of the Senate about a week or so ago, it was very striking and moving and unfortunate in my view. Republican, Democrat, or whatever, these folks are just there to count things, 1 + 1, and there shouldn't be the kind of political threats in that context. Well, let's try to wrap on a positive note. I've listened in on a couple of your podcasts where you've talked to some young folks who were just entering the field of running for office. I'm thinking of the young man from, you can remind me of his name and where he's from, outside of Scranton. I found that a very energizing sort of take on, again, a positive take on where we might be headed. But talk a little bit about him or others that you've encountered that kind of give you some fresh hope.
Well, that you're referencing Max Conway, who will be, because he's both on the D and the R ballot line. He will be the mayor of Dunmore, which is a borough adjacent to Scranton. And I don't believe Max is even 30 years old. And I think regardless of party affiliation that the viewers might have, I think that the fact that there's so many folks under the age of 40 that are on the ballot for the first time, I just think that's an exciting, great thing to have folks like this bring a younger, fresher perspective. I'll give you another great example. There's a woman, Stella Sexton, in Manheim Township, which is in Lancaster County. It's right adjacent to the city of Lancaster, where 222 and 30 meet. And just she's a mom, and she cares deeply about her community, and it looks hopefully, I mean, it's record spending, but it looks like she'll be on the board of township commissioners, deciding really important issues. Once again, part-time, largely unpaid positions, but land use issues and traffic planning and everything that goes into the local government. So I think that's positive on a fairly cold, rainy day.
Right. I'm remembering Max Conway's issue was the siting of a local landfill. One of those unglamorous but very local issues that used to energize, and maybe always will energize, local races.
Yeah, the largest landfill in Pennsylvania, with well north of 50% of what's being hauled there is being hauled from as far away as New England, has been around, I think, longer than Max has been alive. And he said, enough is enough. I'm gonna run for mayor of my community. And yeah, it's very heartening. I think when people think of Northeast PA and some of these places, they think of an older demographic and they think of shrinking communities. But there's another young woman up in Taylor Borough, up the line, as they say, further north in Lackawanna County, who's also in her 30s, who'll become mayor. So once again, I just think it's tremendous that folks get in the arena. As President Roosevelt said, that the credit belongs to those in the arena.
Yep. Well, thanks for bringing those stories to life and sharing those with your 5,500 and growing listeners. And Ari Mittleman, thanks for being with us again today. One more time, the web address for the podcast is.
So it's papoliticalpodcast.org. And we are still, if you type into Apple or Stitcher or Spotify, Pennsylvania Politics will be the first and only that comes up. But David, thanks so much for your work with Committee of 70 and over the years, the tremendous legacy of your father.
Great. Thank you. And we'll see you along the trail.